Here is the actual file folder from my adoption. The file folder I found in the basement of my parents' house when I was 33 years old. I had no clue prior to that I was adopted. Stunning thing to find. Anyway, we're going to look at some of the documents that I found in this folder a little bit later. But first I wanted to give you more details on the craziness surrounding the actual finding of this file. My name is Chris, and this channel is about my crazy adoption story and also a wild reunion story with my birth family many years later. So my folks, or I grew up in the Chicago area, my folks were getting older, and I was traveling back there to help them clean out the house. So they could kind of retire to Florida. That was kind of the plan. And I would come in for long weekends and help, go through different, things in the house and clean stuff out. And this particular time I'm in the basement, and it's a Sunday afternoon. I was going to fly out early Monday, like at 6 o'clock in the morning. So that's kind of the end of the trip. And I met this filing cabinet, and it was a big old one. It was, I don't know how long my dad had owned this, but probably since the 40s or 50s, because it was thicker, heavier, a little taller, and it even had little chrome wings on the top, like chrome accents, like an old car would have from the 1950s. So it was that kind of thing. And I was going through a drawer, and first thing I came across was my dad's old Navy records from World War II, which was great to see. And I'm actually going to do a separate episode on that later on. But what I came across was the divider in this file drawer. It wouldn't go back anymore. I couldn't slide it back any further for some reason. So I reached fingers back over the top of it to try to see if there was anything back there. And sure enough, there was a pile of folders. And that's where this one came from. So there was also a file for my sister who was adopted, and then another file for covering like articles on black market adoptions. So I'm looking at this file and still trying to absorb, what am I seeing? Is this real? And then out of the blue, there's voices. I hear my mother calling down the basement stairs to come up to dinner. It's on the table. So I'm like in a quandary. It's like, okay, do I take this upstairs with me and discuss with my parents who were likely trying to keep this a secret all these years, right? So what do I do? And then I hear footsteps upstairs, bigger ones, my dad walking around. I'm like, oh my God, he's going to come down the stairs and come get me for dinner. And so I'm trying to figure out what to do. And it became like an instantaneous river in Egypt moment, for a better phrase. It was this denial. Just, this hasn't happened yet. This is not happening right now. And my mom called down the stairs again, and I'm panicking a little bit. And I found the strength to I hadn't even opened this yet. I found the strength to put it back in the drawer of this filing cabinet and go upstairs and have dinner with my parents. And it was really interesting because at dinner, I remember not panicking and not being flipped out or too quiet or whatever. It truly was like it hadn't happened yet, and it was just a normal evening with your parents. So very, very, very strange experience. What I did do, which would make sense, is after everybody went to bed later that night, I went back down to the basement and I pulled the file out and took it up to my room so I could look through it. And I'm going to show you a few things I found in there, some very interesting, others maybe not so much, but handwritten notes from my mother when they were meeting with the doctor, a private family doctor, about who this birth mother was. And the good news is she wrote down that above average intelligence. So score number one, birth father, above average intelligence as well. So that's kind of a jackpot to me. Very well balanced. So I like the sound of that. I consider myself a well balanced emotionally person. And then there was some interesting discussion about just heritage, like being a quarter German, half English. A little bit more learning about that is what the doctor was relaying to them without going into specifics, maybe on names of who these people were. The funny notes that I have in here were from baby names. And I don't know how many of you have your parents telling you what names they were considering to name you. But I have an actual list from like 1959, 1960, and it's kind of comical. So my name is Chris, like I mentioned, but it's with a K. And some of the names on this list are interesting. There's Kingsley. I'm glad I didn't get that. There were the general ones: Michael, David, John, Mark, things like that. My father was of German heritage, so there were other names like Carl with a K, very German, Carrie, Christian, Bradley, Westcott, Whitney. I don't know where those came from, and I'm glad I'm none of those. And then there was Prince and Kristen. So can you guess, I ended up being Christopher in the end, but they initially named me Kristen. It's on my birth certificate. And then I've got a stapled addendum to my birth certificate that says Christopher, that they stapled on like 6 months later. Had to get it approved by the county or the state. And I'm sure they just figured I was going to get the crap beat out of me in school if I was named Kristen going to grade school. So thank goodness for that. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for that. The big piece and the big document that was in that file that's carried me forward ever since that day in 1993, through all the search efforts, through finding my birth family, has been a copy of a hospital bill that my dad paid for my mom, and $190 for 4 days in the hospital in late March of 1960. And St. Francis Hospital, Evanston, Illinois, and birth mother and address on here. And so I've had her name, I've had her maiden name, because it says Miss. She was single, she was 20 years old. So all I've had all these years was her maiden name. And so when you think about that, it's like it's 1993. So this is before Ancestry.com. This is before 23andMe or a lot of heavy online resources to search for people. You had maybe whitepages.com, or you had some resources, minimal ones, but you still need to know her married name. I'm sure she probably got married later. I mean, that was my guess, and I think a reasonable person would guess that. So I figured I would be running into stumbling blocks, because in 1993, because the target resource you might go to do a search would be a private detective agency. You'd be calling Humphrey Bogart, stopping by his office and giving him some basic information and see what he could turn up. But I had no idea where my birth mother was from. I didn't have a social security number. I didn't have a married name. I just had a maiden name. And back then that wasn't much to go on. So those are some of the things I found in the files. Monday morning at my parents' house rolled around. So it's 6 a.m, and the cab is at the door, and I say a quick goodbye to my folks, still doing my award-winning performances, and they were still in their pajamas. And then I'm off to the airport and flying home and looking through the files some more. And I just, you realize I need to figure out a plan to talk with them about this. once I absorb it. I need a little more time to absorb this. And plus, I have a adoption file for my sister. She doesn't know that she's adopted, and this is a very sensitive issue. Clearly, they wanted to keep it a secret. They never told us. Family members never said anything. So I needed to come up with a plan. And so after a few weeks of kind of figuring out the best course of action, I kind of came up with an idea on what to do next. And so in episode 3, we're going to get into my next steps. What did I do after all this finding out and getting home to my home base? So I hope you'll stick around for that. Feel free to like and subscribe so you can stay informed on what's coming up with new episodes, and hope to see you next time. Thanks.